The galactic bazaar of Kepler Station buzzed with the usual chaos of interspecies commerce. Vendors from across the known galaxy hawked their wares while translators chirped incessantly, converting thousands of languages into comprehensible trade speak. Among the crowd, Zoe Martinez moved with quiet determination, her human eyes scanning the exotic displays with scientific curiosity rather than tourist wonder. "Another dead end," David Chen muttered through her comm implant, his voice crackling from the research station 3 sectors away. "The Altarian plasma samples are useless for our project. We need something with actual bioluminescent properties." Zoe nodded even though her research partner couldn't see her. Their joint xenobiology thesis was due in 6 standard months, and they were nowhere close to a breakthrough. The other graduate students at Terra University had already secured impressive specimens: crystalline organisms from the Vega system, quantum-entangled bacteria from the Centauri colonies. Meanwhile, Zoe and David had spent their entire research budget on dead samples and false leads. "I'm making one final sweep of the exotic pet section," Zoe said, weaving between a group of chittering insectoids negotiating over fermented fungus spores. "Then I'm heading back." The exotic pet district occupied the station's lower levels, where the lighting grew dimmer and the air recyclers worked overtime to filter out the myriad scents of alien biology. Zoe had expected to find the usual suspects: domesticated hoverfish from Proxima, singing crystals from the asteroid belts, perhaps some of those color-changing mammals the Arcturian traders loved to peddle. Instead, she found something that stopped her cold. The creature lay curled in a containment field barely larger than a shipping crate. At first glance, it resembled the dragons from ancient human mythology: serpentine neck, membranous wings, scaled hide that shifted from deep emerald to midnight blue, depending on the angle of the light. But this was no fantasy-made flesh. Bioluminescent veins pulsed weakly beneath its translucent scales, and its breathing was labored, each exhale releasing tiny motes of light that faded quickly in the stale air. "Is it dying?" Zoe asked the vendor, a 4-armed Rigelian whose universal translator gave him a distinctly nasal voice. "Soon, yes, the alien replied, his secondary arms gesturing dismissively. "Terran atmospheric conditions no good for Draconis stellaris. Needs specific stellar radiation wavelengths, very expensive to maintain. You want pretty pet, I have nice hoverfish, very colorful." "How much for the dragon?" The Rigelian's compound eyes glittered with surprise, then calculation. "Dragon very expensive when healthy. But this one..." He paused, studying Zoe's worn research jacket and the small university insignia on her collar. "For pretty human girl, special price. 1 credit, 1 credit. The price of a synthetic coffee at the station's food courts." "David," Zoe whispered into her comm, "I need you to access the xenobiology database. Look up Draconis stellaris, native conditions, biological requirements, everything." "Zoe, what are you planning?" "We can't afford..." "1 credit, David, I'm buying it for 1 credit. 3 hours later, Zoe stood in the cargo bay of their rented transport vessel, watching the dragon's containment field flicker weakly. David had transmitted everything the university database contained about the species, which wasn't much. Draconis stellaris, native to the Ophiuchus cluster, symbiotic relationship with stellar radiation, believed extinct due to the destruction of their home system's star. The last known specimens died in captivity over 50 years ago, David had said grimly. They couldn't replicate the specific radiation frequencies needed for their metabolism. "You basically bought a corpse, Zoe." But Zoe had noticed something the database entries missed, something visible only to someone who had spent 6 years studying xenobiology, with an emphasis on energy conversion systems. The dragon's bioluminescent patterns weren't random. They formed complex geometric sequences that reminded her of the quantum field equations she'd studied in her physics minor. Working through the night, Zoe jury-rigged a radiation emitter using components salvaged from their failed experiments. Instead of trying to replicate the dragon's native star, she theorized that any coherent energy source might work if properly modulated. The creature's bioluminescent organs seemed designed to convert and store energy, not just process it. When she activated the device, the dragon's scales brightened immediately. Over the next 3 days, the transformation was remarkable. The dragon's breathing steadied, its scales regained their lustrous sheen, and the weak pulse of light beneath its skin became a steady, rhythmic glow. More importantly, Zoe discovered that the creature was not just surviving, It was thriving beyond anything recorded in the literature. The radiation conversion is off the charts, David said, reviewing Zoe's data transmissions with barely contained excitement. It's not just metabolizing energy, it's amplifying it. The output is 3 times the input. That shouldn't be possible. That's not the best part, Zoe replied, gently stroking the dragon's snout as it nuzzled against her hand. Watch this. She activated a small holographic projector displaying a complex mathematical equation in the air. The dragon's eyes tracked the symbols, its head tilting with obvious interest. Then, impossibly, the bioluminescent veins along its neck began to pulse in a pattern that matched the equation's solution. It's not just intelligent, Zoe whispered. It's a living computer. A biological quantum processor. The implications hit them both simultaneously. The Draconis stellaris weren't just rare exotic pets. They were the most sophisticated biological computers in known space. No wonder the Galactic Council had classified them as extinct rather than endangered. No wonder the vendor had been so eager to sell for 1 credit. Within a week, word had spread through the academic community. Within a month, the Galactic Council was demanding the dragon's return to proper scientific facilities. Major corporations offered billions for the creature, while military contractors hinted at even more substantial compensation. Zoe refused them all. Her name is Stella, she told the increasingly frustrated delegations that arrived daily at the university. She's not for sale, she's not a weapon, and she's definitely not going back to a cage. The dragon, Stella, had bonded with Zoe in a way that transcended simple domestication. They shared dreams, communicated through bioluminescent patterns, and worked together on equations that pushed the boundaries of known physics. Under Zoe's care, Stella had begun to reproduce, not offspring, but something even more remarkable. Seeds of light that could grow into new computational matrices. Biological quantum networks that made the best AI systems look primitive. You realize what you've done? David asked one evening as they watched Stella soar through the university's biodome, her scales painting trails of light against the artificial sky. You've given humanity a partner species that could revolutionize everything, faster than light communication, quantum computing, maybe even time travel. Zoe nodded, remembering the Rigelian vendor's surprised expression when she'd bought a dying dragon for 1 credit. The other species had written off the Draconis stellaris because they couldn't see past their own limitations. They had assumed that because they couldn't save the dragons, no one could. That's the thing about humans, Zoe said, watching Stella execute a graceful loop through the air, her bioluminescent display spelling out poetry and mathematics. We don't know when to quit. Throughout the galaxy, the story spread like wildfire. The human girl who had bought a dying dragon for 1 credit and changed the course of galactic civilization. Other species began to approach their own impossible problems with new perspective, wondering what other miracles might be hiding in their discarded impossibilities. But in the biodome of Terra University, Zoe simply smiled and continued her research, her dragon partner painting equations in light across the artificial sky, both of them proving once again that the most valuable discoveries often come from the most unlikely sources, and that sometimes the best investments are measured not in credits but in compassion.